I've been flying normal camera drones for 6 years, but before testing the Antigravity A1, I had never flown a 360 or FPV-style drone, and I'd never used goggles to fly one either. So I'm not approaching this as an experienced FPV pilot. I'm approaching it as someone who already understands drones, but is completely new to this style of flying. And that's really what I wanted to figure out with this review. Does the A1 actually make FPV style flying easier to pick up? And is a 360 camera really that cool or useful? And is it fun enough to make someone want to keep flying it? Because the A1 is a pretty unusual mix. It has the immersive goggles and FPV style controls, but it also has features you'd normally associate with a camera drone, like tracking, return to home, obstacle avoidance, automated flight tools, and a 360 camera that lets you choose the framing later. So on paper, that sounds like it could be a good bridge between a normal camera drone and a traditional FPV, but I wanted to know what it actually felt like to learn and use. So in this video, I'll go through my personal experience of flying a drone like this for the first time, test some of the main features the drone provides, show some fun editing tricks that I picked up along the way, and let you know my final thoughts on whether this is a drone you should add to your cart next. This isn't going to be an unboxing video or a how to fly the A1 type of video. I'll just be sharing my experience flying the A1 and testing some of its main features. If you'd like to see an unboxing or a full walkthrough, let us know in the comments. And if you want to jump to any specific section of the review, timestamps will be listed below in the description. With that said, let's fly in. The first time I flew the Antigravity A1, what hit me right away was how different it felt from every other drone I've flown. With a normal drone, even staring at a screen, I still feel planted on the ground, flying something that is out in front of me. But once you put the goggles on, you're seeing what the drone sees. That alone flips the entire experience. My first genuine thought was that it felt exactly like a virtual reality headset that I've used in the past to play video games. Safe to say, it felt strange at first, but a good kind of strange. It was more immersive than I expected, and honestly, less overwhelming too. I figured it would feel intense, maybe a little bit disorienting, but it ended up feeling pretty manageable, especially out in a wide open area. That first flight also taught me how much open space matters. There was room to turn, mess around, and just get a feel for the drone, and not worrying about hitting something made the whole thing feel way more approachable. The bigger shift, though, was realizing that you can't fly this like a normal drone pilot. You have to stop thinking from the outside and start thinking from the drone's point of view, like you're the one moving through the air. Once that clicked, it got a little bit easier. By the second flight, it stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like something I'd actually want to use. I took it out on a trail in Tahoe, which gave me access to more trees, tighter spaces, and for the first time, the environment itself made me want to shoot something instead of just practicing. That open park flight was good for building up confidence, but the trail is where it really clicked as the kind of FPV flying that actually got me excited. That trail flight was also when obstacle avoidance got interesting. With it on, I had a safety net while I got used to flying around trees and branches, but once I turned it off, the drone felt completely different. It was more free, more deliberate, and honestly more fun. It starts to feel like the FPV footage you see online where the pilot has to stay locked in and intentional with every move. That was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was in a kind of flow state while flying a drone. The other thing that stood out from that trail flight was watching my friends try it. None of them fly drones, and their reactions the second they put the goggles on was honestly one of the best parts of the whole day.
Oh, this is so cool, bro.
So I like pull the trigger
Yep.
and then it goes forward.
Yeah.
You set the range.
Yeah.
It made me realize that this drone works on two different levels. I see it as a creative tool or a way into FPV flying, and my friends just thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever tried. Watching that reminded me why drones are fun to begin with. One feature I really liked was SkyPath. If you've flown a DJI drone before, it's basically similar to setting up waypoints. But here, you can have the drone fly the route automatically while someone else wears the goggles and looks around without having to pilot it themselves. After seeing how excited my friends were to try the goggles, I think this is one of the best ways to share the experience with someone who may not be ready to fly yet, or someone who doesn't want to fly but just wants to see a cool 360 aerial view of a location. Another small but awesome feature I appreciated is that someone standing with you can watch your live point of view outside the goggles. Normally, wearing goggles makes flying feel like a pretty isolated experience. The pilot is seeing everything while everyone else just watches you move around with a headset on. But with the A1, someone nearby can follow what you're seeing on the external screen. That makes it easier for a friend or a visual observer to understand what you're doing, help monitor the flight, and just feel more involved in the experience. As I kept flying and practicing, things started feeling more natural. I wasn't just reacting to how strange it was all anymore. I'd gotten used to the goggle interface, I was a little more comfortable with the controller, and I started pushing it a bit harder. I tested sport mode, FPV mode, flying with obstacle avoidance off, just to see what the drone could actually do without the guardrails. And it still felt pretty simple to fly, which surprised me more than I expected. Now, there's still a real gap between flying comfortably in open space and confidently weaving through obstacles, and I think that mostly comes down to building more spatial awareness with the drone over time. But that's part of what makes it fun to learn. It kind of felt like learning to drive, where at first you're not really sure where the edges of the car are, but over time, your sense of space of where the car is in relation to everything else continues to build. From just those first few flights, my main takeaway was that the A1 was easier to get into than I expected, especially in open spaces, and once I stopped treating it like a normal drone. It feels weird at first, of course, but then it gets really fun. And pretty quickly, you start seeing both the creative potential and the things you still need more practice with. It's exciting for someone like me, who's never flown FPV, or even for my friends who've never flown a drone at all. But there's still a lot of room to keep getting better once you're comfortable. And that led me to the next phase, which was testing some of the specific features that are supposed to make the A1 safer, simpler, and more fun. The four main features I wanted to focus on were virtual cockpit, voice assistant, omnidirectional obstacle avoidance, and the auto edit feature. Virtual cockpit lets you choose from different aircraft and creature skins and switch between first and third person views while flying. I ended up preferring the first person view. If you select the dragon or any of the other animals they have to choose from, it feels like you're riding on its back, so it becomes part of the flying experience, which is pretty fun. The third person view reminded me of a video game where you're watching a character fly, but it wasn't quite as immersive as I expected. To me, it mostly felt like the normal flying view with a character placed in the middle of the screen. It was still fun, especially being able to assign perspective switching to a custom button, but I don't think it's something I'd use on every flight. I'd probably use it more during a casual flight, at a really interesting location, or when showing the drone to friends and family. One thing to be careful of is that some cockpit skins block part of the lower view. For example, when I was using the Dragon while flying low to the ground, it became harder to judge exactly how much clearance I had below the drone. I could still use the altitude readout and the warning indicators, but I wouldn't use that view for tight or low altitude flying. It makes a lot more sense when you're higher up in an open area with plenty of room below you. Voice Assistant lets you trigger basic operations through the goggles, including takeoff, return to home, starting or stopping a recording, taking a photo, switching modes, and starting or stopping a screen recording. This sounds useful because wearing the goggles can make navigating buttons and menus more awkward, especially while you're still learning where everything is. But honestly, going into the test, I assumed Voice Assistant would be one of those features that technically works, but is just slower than just pressing a button. And for something simple like starting a recording, that might still be true by a second or two. But what surprised me was how useful it became while I was still learning the controller. I was still fumbling around trying to remember where the record, camera, and custom buttons were, while the activation button on the goggles was much easier to find as it's literally just the side of the goggles. Start recording. Switch to free motion mode. So in the end, I actually found it really convenient. Switching modes especially was faster than opening a menu, pointing out the option, and selecting it manually. I don't know if I'll rely on Voice Assistant forever once the controller becomes muscle memory, but for a beginner, it genuinely reduces some friction. Obstacle avoidance is probably the other feature that is most directly connected to the beginner experience. The A1 can detect obstacles in every direction, and bypass mode is designed to fly around them rather than simply stop. I tested bypass mode around several workout structures at a park, flying the drone directly toward each obstacle. It consistently slowed down and shows a smooth path around them. On one test, it avoided 2 staggered structures back to back without getting confused. By the final attempt, I trusted it enough that I wasn't worried about how quickly it approached. Now switching to the post-production side, I quickly realized how important and fun editing footage with this drone really was. For a bit of context, I've been a photographer for 10 plus years, and editing photos and videos was always one of the most exciting parts of the process for me. And because it records in 360 degrees, you can focus on flying and choose the camera angle afterward. In the mobile app, you can press record and physically rotate your phone to recreate the camera movement you want. It was very intuitive and generally faster than manually adding keyframes, although getting the timing right definitely took a few attempts. Most movements looked smooth, with a few slightly jerky movements that may have come from the footage or the stitching. Now, of course, you don't have to use this record feature. You could just add keyframes throughout, but this whole process made me think about the practical uses like real estate or property walkthroughs. You could fly one smooth route around a building or through a space, then choose where the viewer looks afterward instead of trying to perfectly frame every shot during the flight. The same creative flexibility applies to photos too. Inside the A1 software, you can reframe the image or animate it by adding keyframes for movement and quickly switch between horizontal, vertical, or other aspect ratios. With a normal camera drone, you have to think carefully about where the camera is pointed when you take the photo. With the A1, you have to get used to the idea that you're capturing everything around the drone, so the bigger decision happens afterward. You can explore the full scene and choose the composition that works best once you're back in the app, whether it's a photo or video. This is really what makes their catchphrase click, which is fly first, film later. The one downside is that the original files are 360 video files, so you can't just pull them from the memory card and start editing them as normal flat footage in softwares like Premiere Pro. First, you need to open the footage in Antigravity's mobile or desktop software, choose the framing, and export a standard video file. Then you can bring that exported file into Premiere Pro for the rest of the edit. A workaround is downloading Antigravity's Premiere plugin, which lets you import the A1 files directly into Premiere. However, when I exported those files from Premiere, they didn't have the greatest quality compared to exporting them from Antigravity's own software, but that could have just been a bug on my side. So this does give you a lot more creative flexibility, but it also adds another processing and export step, which can take some time depending on how fast your computer is. Auto edit is another process that analyzes your footage and automatically builds an edited sequence. For auto edit, I use 6 or 7 videos from 2 main locations, including an open dirt area, a park, and a wooded trail. The setup was extremely simple. I selected the clips, tapped auto edit, and it processed everything in about 2 minutes. It automatically pulled sections from each video, added music and effects, and gave me several templates to choose from. The biggest strength is speed. It gives you a finished vertical or landscape video that you can save straight to your phone and share almost immediately. The downside is that it didn't always choose the best moments from the footage I gave it. Personally, I wouldn't post the full auto edit result as is, but it could be useful for sharing something quickly or getting inspiration for your own edit. I also like the featured section on the mobile app, which has several fun effects that only need 1 or 2 clips. Overall, the app was fast, straightforward, and easy to use, but I'd still refine the final video myself. Once I had a better sense of how the drone felt as a beginner and how the newer features were supposed to support that, I wanted to test its hover stability, wind performance, obstacle-aware tracking, return to home around obstacles, and the overall signal experience. For the hover stability test, I quickly pulled the hovering drone away and released it to see whether it would return to its original position. The A1 returned smoothly and settled into a stable hover. I also tried it with the DJI Mini 5 Pro, and it seemed to be slightly less smooth when re-hovering. However, I don't think this test matters much for normal users. It mainly confirms that the drone holds its position well. For wind resistance, the worst day I flew had winds around 14 miles per hour and stronger gusts. The drone stayed planted, corrected any small movement quickly, and the footage stayed steady. It was mostly what I expected, but still reassuring for such a small drone. I'd then tested the tracking feature on that trail with my friends. The drone locked onto one person and stayed focused on him, even when someone else ran off in another direction. It maneuvered around 2 trees while keeping the selected subject in frame, so overall a success. For return to home, I flew the drone below a tree line and activated return to home. It climbed above the trees and returned successfully without getting stuck. It did fly closer to the treetops than I expected, but it avoided everything and completed the return fine. I trust it in an emergency while still making sure the home point and surrounding area are clear, like you always should do. The last test I did was around signal strength. During normal flights, I did notice the signal weaken when trees partially blocked the drone. The goggles got blurry and slightly laggy, but I never lost the connection completely. With that said, if you ever were to lose connection with the goggles, this drone is a lot harder to fly normally without the goggles compared to a regular two-stick drone for obvious reasons. You can still do it, it just gets a little awkward to get used to. Now let's quickly go through some of my favorite features, biggest limitations, and my final verdict on the drone. The most fun part was flying faster in sport and FPV mode. That's when the A1 felt less like a normal camera drone and more like the immersive FPV-style experience I was hoping for. And when you add the 360 camera, it's just a cherry on top. Speaking of, the 360 camera and post-flight reframing and editing are the most useful creator features I think I've ever tried with a drone. One flight can become several different shots, including horizontal and vertical versions, without flying the route again or losing quality. The most beginner-friendly features were Voice Assistant and SkyPath. Voice Assistant made it easier to access different functions without memorizing every button on the controller, while SkyPath was a fun, low-pressure way to get comfortable with the goggles and explore the 360 view. Obstacle Avoidance gave me the most confidence. It responded consistently, made smart decisions, and gave me more room to experiment without every mistake turning into a crash. The two biggest limitations were that you can't fly the drone backward, which is kind of interesting, and that using the footage in a larger project takes extra work because the A1 files need to be processed before you can edit them in softwares like Premiere Pro, unless you use different plugins. But overall, the A1 is definitely more approachable than I expected. It feels like a hybrid between a 360 camera drone and an FPV drone, which I think is exactly what it's meant to feel like. Beginners get an immersive flying experience without immediately learning full manual controls, while creators get the freedom to reframe everything afterward. The editing workflow does add an extra step, but the amount of creative control you gain over the footage more than makes up for it, in my opinion. For someone curious about FPV drones like myself, or someone who just wants to try something different from the traditional setup, this 100% feels like an approachable and very fun place to start. If you're curious about getting the Antigravity A1, check out the first link in our description. Let us know in the comments if you've flown this drone or are thinking about it, and if you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Until next time, blue skies and safe flying.